Rigged was first published as Game of Mates in 2017. It was an amateur booklet printed on demand from who knows where. We did all the marketing ourselves, meaning a garage stacked with books to be sent to bookstores and events. The many spelling mistakes were such an embarrassment that we felt forced within weeks to put out a slightly adjusted version, though we didn't really tell anyone. We still have some of the originals in boxes and give them out to friends or the forgiving type. While the production of the book was amateur, the content was not. The ideas in it had been brewing since 2010, when both authors independently discovered the true depths of the corruption that had taken hold of Queensland and Australia. Cameron was working in a regulatory office, witnessing one scandal after another, with the corrupt usually in charge and getting away with it. Paul was then at the Queensland University of Technology, or as he secretly thought of it, the Banana Republic of Queensland. It was the time when the Mayor of Brisbane gave the company of his wife contracts worth millions, when the politicians appointed someone they could trust as the head of the Supreme Court, and when Vice-Chancellors wrote bogus reports to support the decision of politicians to replace the head of the anti-corruption body with an insider to the property market corruption scams. At the national level, the Gillard government had just given billions of dollars worth of concessions to a mining industry that was largely owned by foreigners and that had run a very successful anti-government campaign, allowing them to dictate terms to the government. The foxes were hence taking over the chicken coops left, right and centre, not even bothering to hide the blood on their teeth. The brazen nature of the corruption was matched only by the general apathy of the population that, by and large, had their heads firmly stuck in the sand, angry at every attempt to make them see what was going on. Both of us strongly felt the situation was wrong and had to be documented and analysed dispassionately. We set up several research projects, spent a lot of time thinking about how it all fitted together, and eventually decided that our findings needed to be put into an easy-read format in which highly complex matters were boiled down to their essentials. This led us to telling the story in Game of Mates of James, the connected insider, and our everyday Australian who is fleeced by the game James plays, who we then called Bruce but now call Sam. We did, of course, also write proper research papers for high-level academic journals and got them published, but the point of that was to have street cred and technical feedback. Academic papers were a step along the road, not the finish line. The credit for this updated version should go to the team at Allen & Unwin and in particular Richard Walsh. Richard liked the original book and reached out to us about whether we would be willing to write an update and extension to the first edition. He and his team persisted, despite some reluctance on our part to again engage with the dark side of Australia, telling us the effort was needed. Good on him. So thanks to the entire Allen & Unwin team, Elizabeth Weiss, Tom Bailey-Smith, Susan Keogh, and our illustrator, Carissa Harris. In the intervening 5 years, corruption and political favouritism only became worse in Australia. We joked that Game of Mates was not a how-to guide, but we suspect that many purchasers gave the book to their sons and daughters with the message, "Read this, we're James, this book tells you what we do and how we do it." Rather like how the film The Godfather is particularly popular among mafiosi who started to behave like the characters in those films, we suspect that we too have created a mould for how the corrupt in Australia conduct themselves. It was not the intention, but perhaps inevitable. James always does the early running. Yet Sam's move is ultimately more decisive. Our wish with Rigged is the same as with Game of Mates, to simply explain how politics in Australia truly works and thus the degree to which the majority is unnecessarily shortchanged and belittled. We lay out how it is done, our best estimates for how much it matters, and our best suggestions for how the situation can be remedied. Our hope is that a broader movement in Australia emerges, oriented towards a renewal of the Aussie spirit, and that movement will find some value in this book. In our estimation, the medium-run future of Australia looks bleak. The international reputation of the country got a knock during the COVID years, as the country closed its borders and became seen by others as a nation bereft of empathy towards anyone who would not toe the line. The school disruptions to the health system, Forced social distancing and forced business closures, furthermore, created huge misery and long-lasting damage to the production and skill base of the country. The government could only keep a lid on the underlying impoverishment that the COVID policies led to by printing enormous amounts of money, distributed disproportionately to the wealthiest. We expect the next 5 years or so to see a lot of political unrest as the impoverishment and division becomes clear and the fight over the nation's wealth becomes bitter. That might evolve into something positive, like a strong reform movement that wants to renew the Aussie spirit, or it might evolve into something very ugly indeed, like a fascist movement that blames the problems on some defenseless section of society and then tries to socially, or even perhaps physically, eliminate them. But we hope for the best. Yet, in the longer run, we think the outlook for Australia is still fantastic. It has a socially cohesive population, low crime rates, high basic health, lots of natural resources, an underlying warm and egalitarian culture, and is in an area of the world that is still on an historical upwards trajectory. Once Australians refocus on being productive and fair, rather than hoping for crumbs off the table, we see no reason for Australia not to prosper. We do not know exactly when the reform wave will happen that Australia needs to have to get to that brighter future, but we are confident it will happen and that there are plenty of good ideas that can be implemented. Sam, you'll be right once again, but only after some hard yakka. Chapter 1. A Loathsome Tale. Rigged is the story of how Australia became one of the most unequal societies in the Western world, while a generation ago it was one of the most equal. It is the story of how groups of mates have rigged our corporate and political sectors and managed to rob us, the Australian majority, of over half our wealth. To understand how the game of mates is played and to disrupt it, we must see Australia through the eyes of our villain, whom we call James. In reality, the game of mates is played by well-connected individuals called Eddie, Peter, Gladys, and so forth. Only rarely are they truly named James, and we of course do not want to offend any James out there who is not a villain. This book is about how the Jameses of this country play their game of mates. It is about how much their game costs you and what we can do to stop them. Opposing our villain is our champion Aussie, whom we call Sam. Sam represents the men and women who are complete outsiders and never benefit from the game of mates. Thank you for listening to this sample of Rigged. To hear the full audiobook, subscribe to Fresh Economic Thinking.